All right, good morning. How are we doing? Grant, thanks for the kind introduction. Grant said something really key to start the day. It starts with people. You know, we can talk technology all we want, but really it's about people, and it's awesome to have people here gathered and live. I know we've got some people who will see this on video, but it's all about being together. My name is Mike Hayes. As Grant said, I'm the Chief Digital Transformation Officer at VMware. I'm responsible for our global operations, our CIO organization, our data organization, Chief Security Officer organization, transformation broadly, and really dealing with the same things that everybody in this audience is dealing with. You know, how do we go help our organizations create more value in the world? So besides my role at VMware, like Grant said, I spent 20 years in the Navy SEALs. Look, as an individual Navy SEAL, I've been shot at, I've been rocketed, I've been run over by a Carnival cruise liner, I've jumped out of a building rig to explode, I've amputated a teammate's leg. As a commanding officer of a SEAL team, I've made the hardest decisions that there are to make in any sort of an organization. You know, what operations do you go on? You know, what missions do you say yes to? What do you say no to? And ultimately, the risk that an organization assumes in order to go create the value that it's aspiring to create. I also spent a chapter for 2 years. I ran defense policy and strategy in the White House for both Bush, and then lived through the transition to President Obama. And so I've seen the absolute best that our nation has, the best and brightest solving the hardest of problems. And I've also seen the inverse in DC, which is the egos or desire for credit, or cultures where you try to have the meeting after the meeting on the side quietly, kind of get in the way of obstructing progress. It's a long-winded way of saying that I've got an eclectic set of experiences, but most importantly, through it all, I've learned. And now I'm really passionate about sharing and bringing that to a wonderful group like today. I thought I would actually start the day with a story. In Iraq in 2007, I was the deputy commander, the second in charge of all of the special operations in Anbar province. People might have heard of garden spots like Fallujah and Ramadi, places that you don't find on Airbnb. And it was hard. Our job was quite simple. We were responsible for stopping bad people from doing bad things to good people. We were going out night after night after night. And in the SEALs, our job is to never fight fair. That can be a little bit of a shocking statement. We're always on the right side of ethics and moral and the law, et cetera. And at the same time, how do we get every advantage that we possibly can? Technology, night vision, lasers, all kinds of, better intelligence and better fusion of everything to come together so that we can make informed decisions. I hope you're starting to hear connections with ML Ops. We literally were going out night after night in what we called one cycle of darkness operations. So sun would set, we'd get in either helicopters or vehicles, drive or fly, get out maybe 3 kilometers from the target, usually walk in, try to stay very quiet until the last second. And in my first month in Fallujah, there were 35 Marines killed in the greater Fallujah area. So 35 great Americans killed in action in the first 30 days there. As SEALs, we were in a base within a base, kind of a post within a post, if you will. 1,500 Marines in this post in Fallujah. The SEALs had our own kind of locked, gated compound within that. And literally, we're just trying to help figure out what was going on and make progress. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because night after night, Fallujah Surgical, that's the hospital, if you will, on the base in Fallujah, would have a loudspeaker that would just blare out, "Anybody with A positive blood, please come immediately to Fallujah Surgical." The next night, anybody with B blood, come to Fallujah Surgical. And these all times of the day when the blood supply became low, but there was some Marine or some American who vastly needed a blood transfusion in order to stay alive, was critical. So when you're going out night after night in the SEALs, the hard thing is you're sleeping literally usually 4 or 5 hours a night. And when that call for blood comes during your 4 hours of sleep, and it's your type of blood, what do you go do? So the utter exhaustion of going out night after night, I'm laying in my rack, if we called it, and sleeping, and I hear the loudspeaker, and I'm like, oh gosh, and I'm like A positive blood, and I'm like, what do I do? You know, like some Marine might not make it if I don't get out of bed and go do this. And you kind of, honestly, to be really transparent, you kind of sit there and you hope that somebody else goes. But it's a hard problem because you're like, well, what if? You don't know. And this particular night, I was like, okay, I got up. About maybe a 6-minute kind of semi-sprint over to the Fallujah Surgical. And when I walked in, I was, just didn't want to talk to anybody. I was in just one of those like stupor modes and get ready to just put my arm out and give some blood. And I walk in and I see sitting in the chair already with a needle in his arm is my friend Kyle. And Kyle and I didn't even exchange words. We just looked at each other and did that like head nod. And you're like, okay, on the one hand, I'm just like absolutely blown away that there's another one of my SEAL friends there and just doing what it takes, literally giving life to people. So what I would say is, why did Kyle go do that? It's about sacrifice and it's about people, it's about others. So we'll talk about technology in a second, but what I really want to share are 5 things that are 5 comparisons between the Navy SEALs and just broadly ML ops, no matter how you define it. But before I do that, what I want to recognize is that today is May 5th, and Kyle was killed in action on May 5th, 2017, 10 years after we served together in Iraq. If you look on my Instagram, this is .MikeHayes, you'll see a wonderful picture of Kyle holding the flag. And so while we can all feel sorry, I feel tremendous loss and tremendous sadness on Cinco de Mayo will never be the same for me. But at the same time, you can either feel sorry for yourself and kind of look down and in and at your feet, or what you can do is celebrate life, celebrate people, and go try to create that positive impact that Kyle tried to make and did make over the course of his 37 years on the planet. So the 5 things that we'll get into. Number 1 is exactly what I just talked about. It's about mission, it's about meaning, it's about purpose. A lot of times we hold up technology as the ends. We have to remember that technology is the means to an end. So what's your end that you're creating? What's the value that we're creating in the world? Technology is awesome. It is the power to as we know, change the world minute by minute. And that's what each of you are doing. The framework I love to think about with technology is a comparison to GDP, gross domestic product. Remember GDP from Econ 101? It's really simple. It's just labor times productivity equals the total economic output of either a nation or the globe as a whole. The labor part of the equation is relatively simple. It's fertility rates, or if you're at the country level, it's migration, immigration. Where it really is about is productivity. That's where the juice comes from in that equation, and that has the ability to massively lift up the world and nations. And so when you go to work every day, working on your model or your data governance or points in between, you want to step back and say, you are literally making the world better by increasing learning, increasing utility with that value that you're creating. So my emphasis, my push for this whole conference is saying, why are we here? Why do we do what we do? Just understand the connection between what you do and making the world better, because it's absolutely clear in my mind and it should be in yours also. So while the world can hold up people like Kyle and say, hey, awesome contribution, great American, patriot, hero, teammate, the same is true about each and every one of you. You are all here to make this place better in whatever ways make the most sense to you. Some people say, hey, Mike, thanks for your service. And those words are always appreciated very genuinely. But I always flip it back on people and say, thank you for your service. And how are you serving? You don't have to wear a military uniform to serve. The military doesn't have the corner market on service. We all serve each other. And how do we serve each other? By using the gifts and the abilities and the skills that you each have with technology to make the world that better place. So, really, thing number 1, mission, meaning, and purpose. Before I get to thing number 2, I want to also say I'm just trying to create some surface area here so that we can have some brave people come up to microphones and ask questions about anything that you'd like at the end of this. If we don't get questions, I've got some Navy SEAL instructors will come in with fire hoses and pull-up bars, and we'll really start the conference off right. So I do ask that you think about your hardest questions. The second thing I was going to talk about is decision making. Think about what is ML Ops? It is a massive uplift in the ability to make decisions. So let's talk about the analog version of decision making before we get to the technology version. What is analog decision making? Look, I was a commander of a whole special operations task force in Afghanistan. In 2012, I ran everything in Southeast Afghanistan, which was SEALs, Army Green Berets, and a bunch of varied support specialties in order to come together and create one winning organization. As the commander, I was literally the person to decide when an aircraft drops a bomb onto the ground. And as the commander, you do not ever want to get that decision wrong. I've made life-ending decisions over 1,000 times, and sometimes in 30 seconds. Now, our goal, I'm very proud to say we never harmed anybody we shouldn't harm. I just want to make sure that's clear. And I'm just being very open and transparent and honest and bringing you in on what is it like to carry the weight of that decision. Well, the analog version is pretty simple. I think of decision making, I think somewhat uniquely. I see myself when I'm making that final decision as the input and the decider. I should say an input, not the input, an input. And so when you're thinking about complicated decision making, all you're really doing is getting the best possible inputs you can, as quickly as you can, and then making the decision with the best information you can. So in decision making, a lot of people say, hey, we need to make this decision in 2 seconds, and some people say we can make a decision in 3 weeks. What I say is that the first decision in decision making is actually not the decision. The first decision in decision making is when to make the decision. So think about it like this. If you want to get the best possible inputs you can to the decision, you're using all the resources you can to improve your signal-to-noise ratio, your volume, your flow, et cetera, on all the different sources you can. At some point, the time associated with getting more information costs more than the marginal value of the information that's coming into your model. That is the when you make the decision. That's the inflection point. So now how do we do that in real life? It's oftentimes intuition, but what you're really doing is you have years of logic that you don't necessarily understand that is causing a gut reaction. All intuition is actually a series of logic that you haven't crisply unpacked yet. And it's a series of experiences in life. So as the commander of a SEAL team, trust me, I wasn't like creating some model in my head. All I was doing was saying, okay, I've seen these patterns before. I've seen this, I know how to mitigate this risk. I know how to get another data source. I know how to get faster data, better data. So what's important in the example in the SEALs is, think about a Navy SEAL platoon out on an operation, being shot at. And you've all heard the machine gun fire, the Saving Private Ryan kind of situations. And that can get quite frantic at times. But the thing about the SEALs is we just remain calm. No matter what's happening, you remain calm. And so that input from the SEAL in the field to me as the commander in the headquarters is very simple. Hey boss, here's what we need, and some other coordinating logistics. Well, for me, the first thing that I've done is I've already trained the people in the field on how I think about when to say yes and when to say no. So my first screen on the logic is actually a trusted person who is doing the exact same thing at that person's level. Now, I have information that person cannot physically have because of the position in the field. I've got access to lots of data, terrain maps or unmanned aerial vehicles with feeds, so I can see things that the SEAL platoon can't see. I can see history very quickly on what's happened in the area, not well enough, but that's another challenge. But what are the dynamics and what information can I gain and how do I fit that whole puzzle together? Then what's really, really important here is to say, okay, in any situation, I take all that information, I'm either a yes or a no. Now, I might individually be a yes, let's drop bomb from plane to ground. What's really important is how do I take other very seasoned, experienced people to also feel comfortable with their own yes or no and not have groupthink, and think about bias. Think about your model that's going on there. What could be wrong with the model? What are you missing? I can tell you another super quick story is that one time, first of all, I made everybody in the organization feel comfortable having an opinion. Historically, it's like, you know, the big badass SEALs who've been doing it forever are like, you know, the ones who are making the decision. The thing to creating a winning organization is not having a two-tiered society where you've got SEALs and non-SEALs. The way to create the real win and the real power from the organization is to have everybody's gifts and abilities and decision making, et cetera, celebrated and respected and valued. On one particular night, I had a, mid-20s woman who ran our communications infrastructure, and she just happened to be, in the operations center and seeing what was going on, and she'd been around the headquarters plenty, and I thought she might have an opinion, and I said, hey, Michelle, what do you think here? What's your view? And she said, no, here, I wouldn't do it, and here's why, unpacked her logic. And I thought, wow, very interesting. And while I was a yes, she was a no, I ultimately decided no. And I will tell you, 10 minutes later, unmanned aerial vehicles over this Target building. We knew there were terrorists in the building, but we also saw 12 women and children walk out right after we said no. So now how does that happen? That happens because the organization has humility and the ability to not be so stuck on your decision. You have the agility to turn your decision around. And I say this, I hope you're all connecting this, I'm sure you all are, in your own areas of ML ops, whether you're in the ideation and infancy stages or even start at the data layer, all the way out to the governance of many models and algorithms and saying, how do we collectively put all this together? When do we retire things? And points entirely in between. So with decision making, there are perfect parallels between the SEALs and what you're doing. So what can you learn from others? Let me talk second about the point, actually it would be third, mission was our first. The decision making second, and third I want to talk about training. Training in the SEALs is an interesting concept. I want you to think about training your models while I talk about SEAL training, okay? I'm 51. I went through SEAL training in 1993. I'm 93 undergrad, right from college to SEAL training. And my class started with 120 guys and 19 graduated. All 120 who came in the front door had the physical characteristics to be a SEAL. And then what gets weeded out through time are some combination of drive and determination and maybe stupidity to some degree. But But no, in all seriousness, what happens is we weed out people who cannot mentally cut it. Now, in training, what we do, the thing the 19 have in common is that every day for the 6 months of SEAL training, you get stretched, and then you get comfortable. And then you get stretched further, and then you get comfortable. And over and over and over. And so right now you're sitting there thinking, oh, it's a very simple lesson in learning how to stretch your limits. True, but not the biggest point. The biggest point is you get used to operating in new uncomfortable limits. That's the real point. So every SEAL can get dropped in to some random situation where you really don't know exactly what's going on. And instead of being uncomfortable, you're very comfortable. Like I said before, and I'm no different than any SEAL. Any SEAL who's been shot at or rocketed or been in combat, et cetera, we very simply separate out and compartmentalize the negative emotion. And you become a bit of a a machine where you compartmentalize and say, what do we do here? Do we continue on the mission and go advance it, or has the risk calculus changed in some way? And do we actually decide, nope, we're going to come back another night and do the same thing a different night? These are all decisions that are being made on the fly. And so when you're thinking about training, think about training your model. What are you doing with your model? What use cases are you solving for? Are you starting with, are you solving for the right use cases? Because remember, there has to be business value at the other end of a model. Otherwise, it's useless. And now, unless it's learning to create other models. But if you think about, you have to have the adoption and the contribution from data science in order to, in business terms, grow top line or run the business more efficiently. How do you create insights so that you can sell more, so that you can decide what markets to go move into? Do you go deeper in the markets you're in? Do you go more laterally? These are decisions that business leaders are always wrestling with. So insights is a very broad term, but if you think about it, what you're really solving for is the unknown. And back to the training point, what you're training for is the unknown. Okay, I want to kind of talk fast here so we can make sure we have time for questions. The next thing I want to talk about, number 4, is risk. Risk. In the SEALs, my job is very simple. Really, it's not to get all dressed up and fancy and go out at 3 in the morning in 120-degree heat and night vision and whatnot. It's really to assess risk. Now, the risk calculus is quite simple. It's what are we trying to achieve in the world with a series of missions, and then at a macro level and at a micro level on any given single mission. So I like to divide the world into vision, kind of where you're going, strategy, how are you getting there, and then execution. But what's important is you have to have that feedback loop all around that whole cycle, because vision can change, usually a little slower. Strategies can change based on changing situations, and execution can certainly change. So when you think about risk, the way I think about it is the positive space and the negative space. You've got risk that you can see and you can size up, but the greater risk is always the risk you can't see. And so how do you systematically move risk from the unknown quadrant to the known quadrant so that you know how to size it up? It's just like, think about, you've got 5 really awesome, just call it data sets to feed a model. What about data set number 6 that you don't have, or 10, or n? What are you missing? What are you missing in your model? And it's not different than a SEAL operation. We might be getting ready to go out and do something, but what I'm thinking about is, what are we missing? Okay, this is a little bit of a parallel story, but again, back in Afghanistan, when I was running that operations center as the commander, my job was to not have a job. I joke around, the L in SEAL stands for lazy. But in all seriousness, when we create an organization where we can actually have time to think about what we're missing, that's the first step in systematically identifying risk. Because think about your email inboxes or Slack or whatever tools you're on. Think about the flow coming at you. Most of us have more flow coming at us than we can handle, right? And then couple that up with Instagram and LinkedIn and Twitter and blah, blah, whatever else is out there in the universe. Like, oh my gosh, we all have more coming at us than we can handle today. How do we prioritize? Well, prioritization is very simply a decision. So go back to that decision-making conversation and apply that to deciding on a priority. But importantly, how do you systematically get into that unknown quadrant is a function of being able to get into that negative space that I'm talking about. It's the challenge is, do you carve out time for yourself to think about what you're missing? Helping lead VMware, the situation that I'm in, I've got more coming at me than I can imagine. It's really, really hard, and one of the things I'm not good enough at, one of the many, is to slow down and carve out that think time. And then Then, importantly, remember, I'm only one person trying to think about that negative space. I will be helpful and insufficient to achieve that systematic approach to what you're missing. So in the SEALs, when I'm thinking about what we're missing, or I'm in my role in VMware and I think about what we're missing, I think about who are the best placed people in order to answer that question as well. I usually solve that or approach that and lean on two types of people. First and foremost is proximity to the problem. Forget about like corporate hierarchies, they don't matter. That's not what matters. What matters is who is closest to the problem and who is best suited based on experience to solve a problem. When I was in the SEALs, we didn't, sure, there are ranks, but we all know what people are relatively good and relatively bad at in the group of 16 people. We want the person who has some combination of relative bestness and relative closeness, to not a Scrabble word, or you won't find that one on Wordle. But the relative proximity and the relative experience solving problems is where you want to solve the problem. So as I'm trying to think about risk, I'm thinking about who meets those criteria, who I can pull in and ask for help. But at the same time, I am constantly, as working at scale, working at VMware, thinking about prioritization and saying, is it worth it? Because everything can't be a priority or nothing just became a priority. So where do we spend our relative effort and energy, and where do we spend less? And that's another decision that you're making. And keep in mind, these are all things that you could model out if you wanted to. Okay, the next thing I'll talk about is feedback, number 5, and then I'll wrap up and ask for questions. But feedback. Look, creating a product, it's very simple. So somebody has a vision or a platform like Domino. There's a vision and a value that will be created from a platform like Domino. It's awesome, right? There's a market for it. Then you're looking for product market fit. Is what we've built fitting the needs of the market? Understanding the market is always moving, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes at 10 degrees, sometimes at 180 degrees. But recognizing that that is constantly moving, how do you then constantly look at product market fit? There's only one way, and it's quality feedback. That feedback leads you to features and a backlog. So then you think about what features do you go knock off first, and what do you put to the bottom of the list so that you can be on the fastest trajectory to achieving or maintaining or improving product market fit. That's ultimately what models are helping do, is to think about how either the market, where it's going, or where a product should go, or the operations of how are things operating? Are we being as efficient and effective as we can to go achieve product market fit and create the value? So in the SEALs, when we came off of operations, they could have looked like the front page of the New York Times. Really awesome, you saved the day, and I could show you lots of videos where you'd be like, wow, that's a really cool organization. What it's really about is finishing the operation and spending your time talking about not what went well, but what didn't go well enough. Because inertia is going to keep what went well going well again in the future. You've already done that well. There's a high probability that what went well will go well again. Not 100%, but the time you want to spend is on what didn't go well enough, and then not just talk at the level of what went wrong, but get underneath that and say, do we understand why something went wrong? You see, when there's a 21-year-old SEAL on a mission who came out of a building at 3 a.m. and turned left, and he should have turned right, we could say, okay, knucklehead, you turned left, you should have turned right, and he could be like, okay, I should have turned right. Not helpful. What you want to do is say, why did you turn left? Tell me what you were seeing, and force that person to unpack what is effectively the logic of the decision making. There's a certain amount of data that the person was seeing, like what's the illumination of the moon, where are the placement of the other buildings, how many people are around, what do you know about the situation on the ground? And then there's a logic layer that is applied mentally to say, why did you do that? So I like to say that in the SEALs, we didn't teach people what to think, We taught them how to think. Because what I'm certain of is that that 21-year-old SEAL who turned left and should have turned right will never be in the exact same situation again. Never. But if you talk about the logic, that is replicable and helpful in the future. And so that spending time on what didn't go well enough is where the highest return on the investment of that time is. And that's what we do. That's feedback. And that's critical. And so when we think about feedback, a lot of us don't necessarily want feedback. You know, we want to be told that we're awesome. We want our model, or we want what we've built to be awesome. But if you really think about it, what you really want is efficacy in creating the value that I've been speaking of. And the best path to that is getting the feedback. If you think about when we were all in third grade, you know, our parents or whoever raised us, grandparents, uncles, aunts, whatever, sent us off to coaches for sports or instruments to give us feedback. And basically our whole lives growing up, we weren't good enough at a sport or an instrument. And we got used to that as a kid. And then think about it in the professional environment. We don't necessarily want that feedback. What's the disconnect there? So the feedback, I just want to really emphasize the value here is in that feedback. Something that's very paralleled between the SEALs and the ML Ops world as you are creating value in either what is ultimately in a business, increasing growth or improving efficiency and improving the bottom line. So I want to kind of tie these five concepts together with two quick examples, just to kind of bring it to life a little bit, because I worry that this is a little bit too theoretical. Let me just tell you, like, very practically about decision making and mission and meaning and training and whatnot. At VMware, we were recently deciding on what a certain platform we would go with for master data management. And where I sit in my chair, the only thing that I want is a really great process that gets the smartest people at the table to say, hey, here's what we think. And we had, you know, very transparently, we had some people who wanted one thing and some people who wanted another. And you end up having a conversation about, oh, I want X and I want Y. Well, how do you go solve that question? To me, it's pretty simple. What you need to do is step back and say, all right, everybody, forget your own individual position on what you want. Think about the attributes of a decision that we're making. What are the attributes of what we're buying? We want, it's, you know, cost, functionality, resilience, partnership with another, like with the owning firm of the platform or the technology. You know, you go on and name 10 attributes that are important to any decision-making process. So agnostic of whether we choose product X or product Y, first what we did, we got all the people who had differing opinions to first agree on a process. What are the attributes we care about, and what's the relative weighting of what we want? Cost is 10%, functionality is 30%, and so on. You can kind of see it in your head. Now what you've done is you've helped people to understand, okay, we agree on a process and a model. Now the only decision is when you take a certain product, you have to agree what's the value of a certain functionality, what's the quality of a certain feature or functionality, and you can have the conversation so that at the end of it, you've got a really simple model that just says, here's what we think. And now what's happened, even more importantly, are the people who wanted product X, who got product X, they're happy. What I worry about in the chair that I'm in is, what is everybody who wanted product Y, what are they gonna think and do and feel after we make a decision on product X? I want one team, and that's how we win, one team. And so the best way to do that is help people be heard, understood, and then understand why and how a decision was made. And then you can say, hey, look, we really appreciated your input, but by the way, everybody who wanted product Y agreed on the process, and ultimately the decision made itself with the framework. And now it's not a decision made on emotion, it's a decision made on raw logic. And there's a lot more ability to be one team after something like that. So it can sound like it's a little bit of extra work on the front side making a decision, but I assure you on the back side it's way better. Now, let's connect this back to mission and meaning. I mean, imagine today if we could program the way our nation runs from government. Like, you could literally model it out. Like, when we have a lot of disagreement, we have a very bipolarized world. I'm not here to espouse any certain, side of any issue. But if you really think about it, why do we get so polarized today? If we could just think about removing that emotion from the conversation and saying what's best for the nation, we may not necessarily agree on the attributes or the weighting, but then if we can bring that forward and say, what do we think? That's ultimately what will bring us together. So I know it's a little bit esoteric, but the point that I'm trying to make is that all of these things tie together, because what is mission and meaning? It's ultimately about others before self. In the SEALs, we said team, teammate, self. No matter how you translate that, what ultimately we're here to do is to help each other be better together. We're here from different organizations, and how do we learn from each other so that we can all create more value? This is how do we win together? That's really what it's about. And that's what the beauty of a conference like today does. I do want to just, before taking a couple questions, I do want to emphasize, you heard Grant say that you're getting a copy of my book. I really appreciate helping get the word out there. One of the things I learned in the SEALs in the last couple years, I've been retired for 10 years, but still very close to the community, is that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. I grew up in an era where you either showed strength or perceived strength, and weakness wasn't cool. And with all of the profits from the book, I give them to a 501c3 I started that pays off mortgages for Gold Star families. With that book, Never Enough, I have paid off 6 mortgages for widows who don't have their husbands anymore, for children who don't have their fathers anymore. These are people who have paid the ultimate sacrifice. So look, I greatly appreciate your help. If you've enjoyed what I've said here, I think you'll enjoy the book, but I do appreciate your help, whether it's posting LinkedIn or social or whatever. Thank you for that help. It's honestly not for me. You're making a huge difference in the world as well. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you for being here. I'd like to say congratulate you on being on the seats that you're in. You wouldn't be here if you weren't incredibly capable and competent and able to contribute in ways that make your organizations and this nation and planet massively better. It's going to be an awesome conference. And with that, I'd love to see if there's anybody brave enough to come up and ask anything that you'd possibly like.
All right. Hey, Mike, thank you for the talk. I'm wondering if you can talk about how you might instill that comfortableness with the unknown and uncertainty in the civilian world. I get, the SEALs training, there's one way to do that. You just toss people into an unknown environment. But how do you do that on the corporate side, on the business side? Any tactics, any suggestions, any practices that you can recommend there?
Such an awesome question. I'm so glad you asked. What I would just say is lean into the hard thing. We have a proclivity in life to kind of get a little dance our way around the hard things. If you really think about life, you've got success and failure. We think of it too frequently as binary. It's not binary. Failure is only failure if you fail and don't learn. If you fail and learn, you've just succeeded. And so then you think, well, why don't we try hard things? You've got 2 paths in front of you. You've got the easier path where you can have your name up in lights and your bonus will be 3x or whatever. But think about that harder path. That will always put you on the trajectory, the steepest slope to whatever you define success as over time, because that's where all the learning will be. And then if just one other very practical thing is you say, well, why sometimes don't we take the harder path? It's often because we are subconsciously afraid of what other people are going to think of us if we take that hard path and don't do as well. I describe careers in kind of 3 buckets. Bucket 1 or phases. Phase 1 is, we're right out of school and you just got to learn something foundationally and get really good at something. The second bucket is trying to show the world that you're really good at what you've chosen. And then the third phase is a phase that a lot of people don't get to. It's a phase where you're so comfortable with what you've done and who you are that you no longer need to prove to the world that you're good at what you do. And that's when you can do things like stand in front of a room and say, hey, I have no idea what we're doing right now, but I think I can help us talk our way to the situation. There's no, that humility or the ability to turn yourself around on dropping a bomb. Somebody who is less confident may say, hey, you know what, no, I've made my decision, it's the right decision, and they don't want to reverse course. I describe one other quick answer to that is thinking about confidence and humility as two axes, not as a single point on one axis. You've got, sometimes when I do my reverse 360s, people say, man, that guy's super arrogant. I'm in the words of Epictetus, when you criticize me, the only answer is to say, well, clearly you don't know me well enough, or if you knew me better, you'd be criticizing me for my far greater faults. But I would challenge anybody that says I'm arrogant. I'm highly confident. And so that confidence gets often confused as arrogance. And so the thing is to help people understand and demonstrate humility. Demonstrating humility, like all I've done in the person who thinks that I'm too arrogant on the reverse 360 is the person that I haven't yet sufficiently demonstrated humility, and that's where the work is. So the short answer is try harder things, my friend.
Gotcha, thank you.
Thanks for spending the time with us this morning. David Rucker from Domino Data Lab. My question is about telling the difference between when you should charge ahead versus change tactics or change what you're doing. So you mentioned vision versus strategy versus execution. Do you have a method for testing which of those areas, an organization or even personally, you need to make an adjustment?
Yes, it's a great question. I don't have a scientific answer for you. The way I think about that is the constant reassessment of the situation, and you're ultimately just netting out how much risk does a certain situation bear, or in business terms, how many resources will we suck up in order to go achieve the thing? So it's really a simple cost-benefit analysis that's saying, do the costs outweigh the benefits? Yes or no? If yes, consider doing it. Consider continuing your course. But what you're comparing against isn't anything other than the next best thing you could be doing with that time or resources, and then saying, hey, should we still continue on the path we're on, or should we apply these resources to a different problem because it's going to yield higher results? So that's a little bit of the constant assessment that you're thinking through, is to say, stay fluid and be comparing not in a situation of one, but also taking your situation of one that's in front of you and comparing it to the many things that are adjacent, and say, where's the opportunity cost the greatest, and comparing that way.
Great talk, and one of the things that resonated with me was training and creating what I see training is creating culture of success. And one of the things that I always think about with, especially when we hear about models, is suddenly there's a lack of accountability because it's no longer me, it's the model. And so how do you create a safe space in your environment where you're challenging people to be their very best, holding them accountable, but creating a safe space to allow them to fail, that says, that's your best effort, that's okay, we'll learn from this because that's our best teacher is failure. So how do you approach that?
You just answered your own question. The making it safe to fail is the answer. And so it's how do you, as a leader, model the behavior that you need the organization to take on when someone fails. If you can say, hey, you just failed, but celebrate that and say, what'd you learn? I don't care. There's no decision, as long as any organization is on the right side of ethics, moral law, like I said earlier, there's no single decision in any of our organizations that will kill our organization. We might miss a deal, we might get something wrong. That's okay. What's more important is how our organizations work in perpetuity, and think about the discounting the future, the NPV of the learning versus the NPV of that one thing in front of you. The NPV of the learning, if you will, to kind of mix concepts, is way greater. So celebrate the failure, but draw out the learning. Make sure that the learning happens, because that's where the intellectual laziness I've seen often doesn't actually happen. And so I think drawing that out, but in positive ways, is really helpful.
Thanks.
Great question.
So it seems like a lot of what you were describing really bears on things like team culture, all right, like accountability, humility, self-sacrifice, making it okay to fail, making your team comfortable, making everybody feel capable to speak out. And it makes sense how you can do that in a team where you have some degree of control in setting culture and encouraging those types of things. So my question is, how do you accomplish that when you're embedded in a location in a broader organization and the broader culture might be different, right? So like, how do you project those types of values and that type of culture upward or outward effectively to align?
It's a fabulous topic, and we're winding down on time. I'm going to give you the speed answer. The speed answer is thinking about cultural change in both the long term and the short term. So you're going to move things very slowly in the long term, but it's only going to move if you do the hard things in the short term. And so I know that this is probably a somewhat unsatisfactory answer in such a short amount of time, but the thing I would say is lean into those, like the last question and last answer, lean into those cultural challenges where you say, what do you want the team to be? When I talk to younger kids, I say, my daughter's 21. It's not like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I ask her, who do you want to be when you grow up? I don't care about the what, I care about the who. How do you want to treat people? How do you want to be oriented yourself? If you can answer that question, then you can diff back to your short-term and your long-term situations. Do we want me to do 2 more, or do you want me to wrap up? I'm getting the gong. I'm really sorry to both of you. I've clearly underperformed because I'm getting the hook. So no, my sincere appreciation for each of you, and my congratulations again for being in the chair. And thank you again with Never Enough.